Okay, so hello and welcome everyone. Welcome to our first session in a series of webinars that we'll be running as part of our well-being portal, aimed to offer support to humanitarian and healthcare professionals. The well-being portal, as you can see in the picture, was set up by staff and students on the master's program in humanitarian interventions at the University of East London. And it was particularly as a response to the changes that we are all experiencing in the way we work, study, and live due to COVID-19. We are aware that this is a time of tremendous uncertainty and change on a global scale. While some stressors are universal, frontline healthcare providers and humanitarian staff who also work in humanitarian contexts and are no stranger to testing times face unique challenges in terms of physical risk, as well as emotional and psychological toll during this time of heightened and prolonged medical demand. For that reason, we have put together a well-being portal, bringing you a range of internal and external resources for support. As part of the portal, our team is also putting together a series of webinars to offer live sessions on topics relating to mental health and well-being, and today we are launching our first session in the series. My name is Jeeda, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Dr. Lucia Berdondini and Molly Manning, who are there with me, so hopefully you can see them. We'll be your hosts for today's session. Lucia is the program leader of the master's program. She's also a BACP registered Gestalt psychotherapist and has been practicing for over 15 years. With individuals and groups, and running a small private practice at this time. She has particular experience in the psychology of disasters and has focused her professional activity in the field on developing counseling training courses in countries in war and post-conflict, such as Afghanistan, India, Angola, and now most recently, Syria. Molly is a graduate from the master's program in humanitarian interventions. She has worked in the international development sector for 10 years, with a range of project management, policy development, training, and engagement roles. Starting out by joining the NGO Education Partnerships in Africa during her undergraduate degree and working on projects in Kenya. Her interest in psychosocial support began while working for the British Red Cross, which specializes in this area. She now works for the Capacity Building Social Enterprise, accounting for international development as the Senior Overseas Programs Coordinator. And myself, I'm a counseling psychologist and a lecturer at the University of East London. I'm a lecturer both on the doctorate in counseling psychology and the master's program as well. I have been a practicing therapist for 10 years. In my work, I have found that psychology can play an important role in supporting individuals and communities in times of crisis. So alongside my clinical work, I'm also working in the humanitarian field, developing and delivering psychosocial interventions. So we're going to be starting our session today. So what we wanted to say is talk to you a little bit about the aim of these sessions. The aim of our first session today, but also our ongoing future sessions, is really twofold: to help create awareness relating to mental health difficulties and how to cope or manage with them during these times, particularly for humanitarian professionals and healthcare providers. And then another aim for these sessions is to start bringing together a community of professionals who may have similar difficulties and experiences during this time. It is only expected that during these times, levels of uncertainty and anxiety would be at an all-time high for everyone. And coming together can offer an invaluable source of support, particularly during times of crisis. So what will we be covering for today specifically? So each session will be geared towards a particular topic. And our first session is about stress. And I'm going to be talking about stress in general at the beginning. And I will give you an overview of stress and look at typical stress-related responses and coping skills. We'll then be talking about positive psychology, and Molly will be taking us through that. and Lucia will be taking you through an experiential activity at the end of today's session. This part of the webinar will not be recorded. So just a few ground rules to get us started. Keep your camera off for the first part of the webinar. When we get to the activity, feel free to turn on your webcam if you want to. Keep your microphone muted throughout. Remember that participation is optional. Now, some of you might know each other who are here, and if any sort of personal information was shared, please make sure to keep confidentiality throughout. Maintain respect where possible, and feel free to ask questions at any time through the chat box. And towards the end of today's session, we'll try to get to all of your questions as well. So, thinking about stress. Stress can mean very different things for different people and at different times. For some of us, it can represent a complete breakdown in our own lives. To others, it can mean a minor annoyance that is best ignored or tolerated. And in some circumstances, stress can mean an opportunity to rise to new levels of performance in a variety of areas. For example, right now, feeling the stress of delivering this webinar, it's a good kind of stress. If we look at a definition of stress from psychology, stress is considered a psychological and a physiological reaction to a real or perceived threat that requires some action or resolution. So stress requires us to move, to do something. It is a response that operates on cognitive in the way that we think, in the way that we behave, and our biology as well, so internally. Now, when stress is chronic, it can really have significant negative health effects, and that's what we'll be focusing on for the duration of the webinar. And so, when using the word stress for each one of us, it can mean one of two things. It can either be the stimulus, so the description we give for someone or something that is putting pressure on us to do something that feels beyond our own comfortable limits. For example, a pressure of some kind. And this can be external, like an earthquake, a natural disaster, or internal in terms of the way that we think of ourselves. Stress can also indicate some internal response as well. So the internal mechanisms of the body and the mind that are activated when a stressful event takes place. What causes stress? Many things can cause stress. It can either be caused by a major upheaval, a life event, such as divorce, unemployment, moving house, and bereavement, or by a series of minor irritations, such as feeling undervalued at work, or arguing with a family member. And sometimes there are no obvious causes for stress, and we cannot really find what the trigger is. But we know we are feeling stressed anyways. We respond to stress in many different ways, and this could be dependent on our personality, our cognitive style, so the way that we think. It can be different based on our background, our prior experiences, our gender and ethnicity, our cultural backgrounds, and a host of other factors as well. So each one of us will respond to stress very differently, and each one of us will define stress in a very different way. So thinking about responses to stress, they may be grouped in 4 different reactions. So those that are physiological reactions, such as heart palpitations, sweating, dry mouth, fatigue, insomnia, and nausea. We can look at emotional reactions to stress, such as fear, worry, panic, guilt, anger. And then we have the cognitive reaction, the way that we think is impacted by stress. We may experience an impaired memory, disorientation, unrealistic demands. We can also have some illogical thinking, or what we feel unrealistic kind of thinking as well. And then we have the behavioral reactions. These could include crying, withdrawing from friends and family, substance abuse, self-medication, impulsiveness, phobias, hyperactivity, and much more. So in terms of how to manage or how to deal with stress, this is a stress bucket analogy that we use quite a lot in our work. So if we were to think that each one of us has a stress bucket, one that has a particular level of stress within it. So, and if you can think of a bucket with water inside, that could help. Now, if we have too much stress, the stress bucket will overflow with water. And we need to use coping skills so we can keep our stress levels down. For most of us, we'll be able to handle a different level of stress. It won't be the same. And if we were to think of the bucket of water with water inside it, what we need to try to do is to allow a bit of space between the level of water and the end of the bucket so that it doesn't overflow. And we can call that the buffer zone. The more you're able to lower your stress level, the greater the buffer zone there is. And that means you're less likely to feel overwhelmed by stress. And that's where coping skills come in. Now, we have a range of coping skills. These could be unhelpful coping skills that we use, and that means they recycle the stress that we're experiencing. So for example, we could be working additional hours because we're trying to alleviate the stress at work, but that can increase the levels of stress that we are feeling. We have problem-focused coping skills, and these are strategies that you use to change the source of the problem. These strategies are used when you have some influence over the situation. So if you were to think of the buckets of water, and for each one of us, we have different taps of water open, and each tap is a particular part of our life. So for example, our relationships or the work that we're involved in. Now, when these taps are open, sometimes we can close one of these taps. And this is a problem-focused coping skill. And there are these that are emotion-focused coping skills. These strategies you use to decrease the negative emotions that you experience as a result of stress. So if we were to look at the stress bucket, hopefully you can see the level of water in there, the buffer zone, and how some coping skills will decrease the level of water in the bucket, while others will recycle the stress. So what is it that you should do or shouldn't do? Not really should or shouldn't, but what you could do, what could be helpful during this time. So these are just a few examples for you. So for example, you could begin to understand and evaluate your work, your role, wherever you are, the responsibilities, your capacity and risks in the job objectively, and try to see if you can perhaps decrease the level of stress coming from work, or making sure that you work within your own capacity. Reach out to loved ones in times of difficulty and distress, or when making important decisions. Adopt helpful ways that you had used in the past to endure hardship. So a lot of you here may have already had experiences and coping skills that you've used in the past. Try to bring those back when you feel quite stressed. Allow yourself time to make honest and informed decisions for yourself. Maintain routines as much as possible. Allow and accept your own emotions and take time to understand and express your feelings and needs. Seek support and supervision in the workplace if you can regularly. Don't take more responsibility in work than you can handle. Work excessively without taking any breaks or until you feel extremely exhausted. Set unrealistic or unreasonable expectations and demands on yourself. For example, I have to cure every patient, or I have to be there for every friend. Minimize personal concerns and needs, thinking they are unimportant. It's really important for all of us to look at our own lives and see where we need support and really be honest with ourselves. Do not withdraw from your social network and support, such as families and friends. Do so if it feels helpful for a period of time, but make sure you get back in touch where possible. And don't resort to unhelpful coping skills, such as drinking and abusing drugs. When stress is chronic, so for some of us, stress might be this little annoyance, as I said in the beginning. When stress is chronic and is there for a long time, we can become overwhelmed and therefore become unwell. And research has shown that stress can impact your body and your mind. So it can create mental health difficulties and also physiological difficulties such as cardiovascular disease. So make sure that you look out for yourself. Now, often when looking at managing stress, we place the responsibility on the individual to manage stress. And while finding ways to care for ourselves can be really helpful, placing the responsibility entirely on the individual can be an additional stress. So for those of you working in an organization, don't locate blame entirely on the person who's struggling. Research has shown that positioning well-being as a collective response, particularly in organizations, can externalize the responsibility and create a shared environment where it is everyone's duty to support each other. This allows us to vocalize our difficulties, normalize our experiences, and increase solidarity in our work. And so we need to create together, those of you who are managers and within organizational systems, we need to create and protect practices and spaces that facilitate us coming together, as well as allowing for thinking and reflection, growth and development, and mutual support. And so I encourage you to think of ways you can manage stress in the workplace together. And now on to Molly.
Thank you, Jeeda, and thanks for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. So as Jeeda, I'm going to talk a little bit about managing stress and building resilience using positive psychology. So as Jeeda said, I've worked in international development for many years, and in that time I've observed in myself and in fellow staff and volunteers quite a stoic approach to work and its stresses and how we all process them emotionally. So I think when your role and your commitment is to help those at risk, or facing great challenges, it's all too common to put your own needs, your own reactions and emotions to the side. This effect can also be heightened by the high job demands that we're facing. So often there's a large volume of work, there's low resources and a sense of emergency. I think there does tend to be an expectation, at least, or an outward projection amongst our peers that everything is okay, we're all fine, no one is struggling, and everyone can manage the work stress. The work itself and our beneficiaries and our patients are far more important. We all know, of course, that that's not always the case, and from time to time we will struggle as well, and this shouldn't be overlooked. After all, to be able to give your best to your role, you have to be feeling your best too. So actually, as part of my studies on this master course, I did do an assignment looking at the Ebola pandemic response in West Africa of 2014 to 16, particularly looking at how staff and volunteers were affected. So for many, it was not only very dangerous work, it was also highly stressful. And staff and volunteers were facing all the same stress, all the same risks that the affected population were. And actually, organisations found that it was very difficult to get international staff to want to return on further deployments. Now, the reason being were many reasons, but there did tend to be a lack of adequate psychological support at the time of work. And it did seem that there weren't the clear structures or organisational cultures in place to allow people the time and space to manage their stress while they were working, to support their fellow staff and volunteers, and even to just be aware of how they were responding psychologically in that time. Now, this was a very difficult circumstance. It was a very significant health crisis that spread really fast, had large numbers of fatalities, and lasted much longer than anyone expected, which sounds very similar to what we're all dealing with today. Of course, the high job demands are not going to go away. We won't miraculously have less to do and more resources to do it with. But I think there are things that we can do to become more consciously aware of our own needs and that fit in with our normal responsibilities. So one line of study in psychology is positive psychology. And as the name suggests, it focuses on positive aspects of life. Positive psychology is concerned with the concepts of happiness and well-being, which can increase our resilience, manage stress, and provide positive and beneficial coping mechanisms and skills. One key aspect of positive psychology is that it's not just about the absence of mental illness or struggle, it's actually about flourishing and achieving happiness. So this is actually where the self-help movement has been born from. And I know that sometimes the idea of self-help is sometimes met with skepticism, but positive psychology as a discipline is, is very based in evidence-based scientific research, and there's lots that can be taken away from that. It focuses on the principles of mindfulness, which is where we're consciously engaging our awareness and how we feel and how we are responding, which causes us to pause and to focus on ourselves, however briefly. So recognizing what is happening internally means that we can have a greater control of managing and responding to stress environments and events that we're facing. Now, I don't want to get too bogged down into the science of it all, but I think it is important to say that there has been lots of research into human needs and well-being, and many people will refer to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which you can see on the screen here. So as you can see, he created a pyramid structure which shows the levels of building blocks of need. At the bottom, you see we have the basic needs for survival. So these are things like food and water and warmth and security. And this is perhaps why we place the needs of our beneficiaries much higher in importance, because we're working in environments where those basic needs are either unfulfilled or being threatened. And being faced with a lack of these things in others brings a level of perspective. What I think we're not so aware of or don't think of as important is the next logical needs. So you'll see the first here is belongingness and love needs. So this covers things like our relationships, our social connections, our support network. And these do have a powerful impact on well-being and self-identity, as Jeeda has already said. And in the same way that amongst our professional peers, we will project that we are okay, I think there is also a tendency to do this with loved ones. Sometimes this comes from a sense that they can sympathize, but they can't really empathize with the work stress we experience and how it affects us emotionally. And there's also a wish sometimes to separate those worlds, often known as not bringing the job home, which is a very common coping mechanism when we're working in emotionally charged environments. Certainly, positive psychology would encourage you to share your experiences more freely as a way of becoming aware of how it is affecting you, but also letting those who care for you know that a little extra support is needed. Social support is a very important part of building resilience, and so sharing is a key part of that. Sharing can be done in a variety of ways, and this can be through direct conversations with each other, or through writing blog posts, a way of getting your thoughts and your feelings down onto paper or onto the screen. If you feel you don't have the words, you can also share other public accounts written by other people who have gone through similar experiences as a way to help your loved ones understand what it is that you are going through and how it affects you. I think our support network isn't just our friends and family, it also is made up of our colleagues as well. So our colleagues who do in fact understand the work pressures, but as I said before, perhaps we're not all really being truly open with each other about how hard we're finding it, because we're all working towards this important shared goal. You'll see the next level up is the esteem needs. So in this context, our sense of esteem could be affected by feeling that we're not achieving goals, we are not doing enough for the people we are supporting, or the projects that we are working on are not going as intended. And I think it is important to get that recognition and assurance from each other in the face of that. We often focus on the negative of what's not working well, what obstacles we're facing, and certainly most of what we see in the news is negative, and particularly with this pandemic, it has largely been focused on what we're not doing well and what is going wrong. So sharing positive news and recognizing what is going well does have a strong impact on our esteem needs and by extension our motivation and our happiness. Through forums and workshops like this, we certainly want to facilitate that place, as you said, to get you to share more positive news and ideas and encouragement with each other. You know, we can problem solve together. We can focus on what is going well, what achievements we are making as we go through. So please do feel free to use this space in that way. And then you can see at the top, we've got the final tier, which is self-actualization. So this would equate to that achieving happiness and well-being and flourishing, the broad aims of positive psychology. So this is what we are aiming for. Now, I want to stress that positive psychology is not just about the simple belief that a positive attitude will improve your well-being, happiness, and resilience. That is a very two-dimensional view, I admit. And while positive psychology sort of did begin with that quite individualistic approach, the belief that if you think positively, good things will happen to you, it has been developed much further since. So in reality, there's lots of external factors, as Jeeda said, that affect our well-being. And these could be things like our communities, our culture, or our social economic environment. I think we are aware of how these external factors can certainly impact the beneficiaries that we're supporting. So equally, it would impact us in the same way. That's not to say that positive outlooks are beneficial, such as optimism, forgiveness, kindness, and compassion, both towards others and towards ourselves, do have an impact on our self-awareness and resilience. But as shown by Maslow, engaging with our wider societal and cultural structures impact our individual needs and happiness too. So by engaging with our external surroundings, we are able to attach a sense of meaning and purpose to what we are doing and how we are feeling. And that sense of meaning and purpose contributes to that final tier of self-fulfillment. Now, there is another model that has been developed to look at well-being, and that is the life model, and it breaks it down into 4 areas. So we've got the mind, that covers our feelings, our thoughts and values, our sense of meaning and purpose. The body, so our physical needs and our physical responses to either feeling comfort and secure or feeling stressed. And cultural relationships, so this might be our language, our identity, our social ties and network. And finally, socio-economic as well, so the effects of governance, the effects of economy, and the effects of environment. So if we put aside the individual mind and body and we look at the external factors, there are lots of different layers of how these can affect your well-being. So if we go through an example of day-to-day life, imagine we have these 2 micro bubbles of home and life. Now, individually, they have their own stressors inside those bubbles that you will be dealing with on a daily basis. But if we look at with a broader lens, we think about how they interact with each other. So what is your work-life balance like? Is it an equal balance, or are you finding that it's more weighted one way than the other? And how does that affect the harmony between the two? If we go further out, we look at the community in which those bubbles exist in. So this is the area that you live, the town or the city. And how does that affect your move between home and work? What is your commute like? What stresses or obstacles might be in the way to hinder that movement? Going further still, we're looking at the society that you're living in, so the political environment that you're in. So how your life is governed, what laws are you living by, what responsibilities you have as a citizen, and how this all affects your home and work life as well. And then even further still, finally, we've got the environment as well. So it's a much, much broader scale. And this is looking at the stresses that might be created by the effects of things like climate change. Now, obviously, that's a much, much bigger scale of looking at than just the individual stress that you're feeling on a day-to-day basis. And it's not my intention to sort of send you off down a philosophical rabbit hole. I know that we could spend hours and hours thinking about life at this scale, but I just wanted to illustrate the scope of external influence on individual well-being and to highlight the effect of that active awareness and mindfulness as we think about it in these different layers. So I assume you are now starting to think about your work-life balance in a different way, which is great. Please do continue to think about all of the elements. But it is a useful exercise to engage that type of active awareness and perspective about your need and your emotional reactions. As you can see, there is a lot that is out of our control, but to be aware of what is causing us stress or certain reactions helps us to recognize when it is happening and when to start using some simple techniques which can help to counteract the negative effect. So there are many simple and easily accessible self-care techniques from positive psychology that aren't time-consuming or costly. You'll find a video that I've already recorded on this portal, which does list some positive resources and techniques that you can try. So please do have a look as well after this webinar. But I'll talk a little bit about one I've mentioned in particular, just for the purpose of today. And this is a technique that only requires your imagination and about 5 to 10 minutes. It's called savoring. So savoring is a self-hypnosis and reflection technique, which can be applied when we're feeling overwhelmed, stressed, or just emotionally low. We move through states of consciousness throughout our daily lives, ranging from focused attention to daydreaming and everything in between. And these changes do have a physiological reaction on our bodies and our nervous systems. And so having this technique helps to counteract some of those reactions from happening and able to control the stress as we feel it. So savoring is the act of deriving pleasure from an experience or an activity that brings you happiness or comfort. It's a means of tracking and recording the experience and its benefits without being completely absorbed by it. So it does require that active awareness that I've been talking about. Usually savored experiences are quite brief. They're normally only a few minutes long, but they are still really powerful sources of positive emotion. And evidence has shown that consistent practice of savoring is predicative of optimism, life satisfaction, and fewer depressive symptoms. It involves noticing each detail known as sharpening perceptions. And it's commonly used for sensory experiences. So it could be a taste, it could be something visual, something tactile, a smell or a sound. So for example, I might choose hot soup on a cold day, and this is something that automatically makes me smile. It brings me a lot of comfort. I like to go for a walk in the wet, windy weather, and then I get back in and get into warm, dry clothes and have hot soup. It's a very simple activity, but it's something which I really enjoy. So if I was going to use that example, so here's my nice hot soup, then I might think about all of the little details that make it comforting to me. So I might think about what it tastes like. I might think about what it smells like. How does it feel? So that sense of warmth that I get when I swallow it and spreading across my body, how does it make me feel? Does it make me sort of warms me from head to toe? I might think about what it sounds like as well. So the sound of my spoon on the bowl, the sound of me swallowing it or slurping it. I'm not sure how you eat your soup, but there might be quite a distinctive sound that makes you think of that particular action. I might think about the setting that I'm in as well. So where am I eating this soup? What is the environment like? As I said, I tend to do it after a wet, windy walk. So I might hear the wind and the rain on the window. I might be on my own in my kitchen. I might be at a friend's house, or I might be in a cozy cafe. As you can see here in the picture, there's a fire. So I might think about what the fire sounds like or feels like. What is the environment like that I'm in? What can I hear? And who am I with? Is there anyone that I'm sharing this moment with, or is it something that's individual and just for me? As you can see, there's lots of associations and details I can draw from the simple act of eating soup. Going through it in such detail makes me appreciate why I like it and the positive impact that it has on me. So it doesn't have to be sensory. While lots of savoring experiences are based around the senses, they don't have to be. They can be memories of experiences or activities. And they bring attention to the transient of that moment and leads to better savoring and better recalling in the long term. So it's a bit like taking a mental photograph. It promotes enjoyment in the moment, but can also lead to reminiscence, which is another cognitive activity that requires your active awareness. It uses imagery to remember a valued imagery to remember a valued past experience in as much detail as possible. And again, research has found that deliberately reminiscing more often leads to improvements in depressive and anxious symptoms, as well as increasing in positive affect and life satisfaction. So taking the time to savor these experiences and memories provides a level of detail that can be more easily recalled and the benefits felt even when the experience itself isn't possible. So as I said, I'm not eating soup right now, but I'm smiling from the thought of it. It's just giving me that sense of comfort. And I think when we're stressed and overburdened at work, having, that mental memory stored to relish an experience that brings you happiness or comfort is a really powerful source of emotion. That's all from me today. Though, as I said, there are other techniques that I've listed in my video, so please have a look. It's only about 6 minutes long, and there's a wealth of other techniques and information and resources online as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Molly. On to you, Lucia. Do you want to take us through the experiential exercise? I think you're on mute still.
I hope I'm not now.
Yes, can hear you.
Thank you. Thank you, Molly. Thank you, Jeeda, and thank you, everyone. So yes, what I was thinking at this point is to just offer an experiential activity that, of course, you may decide to try or not, or just listen to, and then maybe you can try in another situation, in another moment. I think we are going to record the instruction of the activity, but then when we are going to share, feedback or whatever emerged that you want to share with the rest of us after this, we are not going to record that because it may be personal. So what I would like to offer is really in reference to what has been said today. There are a lot of pressure and expectation that we may put on ourselves internally that come from a lot of possible different sources, our family or our culture or how we expect ourselves to perform in life and in our profession. And often these in Gestalt therapy, I think Jeeda mentioned earlier, I'm a Gestalt psychotherapist, is what is often considered one contribution to our stress, and is called Yontef, Gestalt psychotherapist called it shouldism. So what I would like to you to ask to do is to, if you have a pen and a paper, to take a few minutes and write down between 5 to 10 sentences where you illustrate some kind of expectations that you generally have on yourself. It could be related to life in general, to relationship, to work. It could be a mix of them, but different sentences that somehow sound like I should or I shouldn't. So just don't think too much about it. Things that just come to your awareness at this time. And what I'm going to do is that for a few minutes, just giving you the time to think about that and write these sentences down, I'm going to share my screen, I hope, and sound, and put a little bit of music to give you some background to do this. Okay, let's go back to us. And it doesn't matter if you didn't reach a high number of sentences, but I hope you were able to write down a few. And what I would like you to do, again, Gestalt is very much experiential, meaning that really the power of embody something, express it experientially, is quite valuable and quite important. So I would like you to read these sentences loud. Of course, you can do that because I guess you're all muted, so nobody will hear you and nobody is seeing you, so you can do it. And what I would like you to put attention is when you say each of these sentences and you read it, notice anything that happens in your body, like physical sensation, energy and level of energy, the tone of your voice, how easy or not the sentence come out, and anything else that you may notice about yourself while you say this sentence and you read these sentences out loud. And again, I'll give you just a minute to do that. So check what happens in you when you do this. And take notice of that without trying to change it. It's just observing it and being curious about it. And once you've done that, what I would like you to do, again, reading it loudly, is to read again each sentence, but this time, instead of saying should, try to say want to. And instead of shouldn't, don't want to. And again, when you do that, check what happens in yourself, in the tone of voice, in the level of energy, any physical sensation. What do you notice that is different this time, if anything? So rather than say I should, you say I want to. Rather than say I shouldn't, you say I don't want to. Okay, I hope you had time to try, and again, as I said, you may want to try it in another situation or not at all. And I guess we are back now in plenary altogether to see if there is anything that either you want to share about this specific exercise, anything that you